I'm very honored by this tribute, but the truth is, for me, it's a tribute to the candidates I worked for. I reject the notion that you sometimes hear in political consulting that consultants win races and candidates lose races. The fact is the candidate drives the race. I can't talk about all of the people, but I would say with very, very few exceptions, I was proud to work for them, honored to work for them, and found it, frankly, a glorious experience. I was always proud to be a McGovernite. We were a kind of kids campaign. Everybody was very young. Maybe that's why we lost 49 states. He was a prophet in 1972 on Vietnam, on Watergate, and even on tax reform. Doris Kearns Goodwin and I are working on a speech with Ted Kennedy as we head for a campaign stop on the West Coast. It was an extraordinary privilege to work for him and to be his friend for almost 40 years. Alan Cranston was one of the most disciplined candidates I've ever seen. He understood the power of television and he focused on it relentlessly. When we were criticized in the Times for relying so heavily on television advertising, I told the reporter, a campaign rally in California is 3 people around a television set. Barbara Mikulski I had known for a long time, and it was a great experience to work with her in her 1986 Senate campaign when she became the first Democratic woman ever elected to the Senate on her own. Harold Washington was a revolution in Chicago politics. It was really the assertion of the power of rising minorities who had long been ignored or taken for granted in Chicago politics. He was also one of the funniest people I ever worked for. Federico Pena, believe it or not, one of the great challenges in his reelection was that he was criticized for building the Denver airport out of town. It is now one of the greatest economic assets the city has, and he fought hard in that election, and he won by, I think, about 3,000 votes. Dick Gephardt pulled off one of the most surprising victories in the history of the Iowa caucuses in 1988, and I still believe that if we hadn't run out of money, he would have been the Democratic nominee that year and would have had a very good chance to beat Bush. Tom Bradley was mayor of Los Angeles for 20 years, and he changed this city in a whole lot of ways for the better. No one gave David Dinkins very good odds when he set out to run for mayor in 1989, but he was the person who really enacted Safe Streets, Safe Cities, which took a lot of money out of social programs and put them into policing, community policing. Tom Foley was one of the most decent people I ever met in politics, who as Speaker of the House would reach out to the other side and find a way to move the country forward. Working with President Clinton on the State of the Union messages was quite an adventure. He edited by standing behind the podium and speaking out loud and making his suggested edits. I admired Ehud Barak, for whom I worked in both 1999 when we beat Netanyahu and in 2001 when he had to call an election he knew he was going to lose. And I'm not sure that Ehud likes what I'm telling him there if you look at the expression on his face. I think that may be at the point where I said, look, you don't have to seem better than Bibi on national security. You just have to get a passing grade, a B+ or an A-. And he said, I never got anything but an A anytime I was in school. I remember when we were working on the 2000 acceptance speech, we had a line in there saying of Saddam Hussein, it's time for him to go, an echo of a very famous line that Gore had used in 1992, and he just took a pen and drew a line right through it. He was not prepared to risk that kind of war in the Middle East. I think he would have been a very good president, and of course I think he was elected, just not inaugurated. I worked for the British Labour Party starting first in the late 1980s and was very involved in the 2001-2005 campaigns. I learned an enormous amount from Gordon Brown, who was the strategist and principal architect of the transformation of the Labour Party in Britain. And as Prime Minister, he probably saved the world from going off the economic cliff in 2009. There was a moment of great joy in the Kerry campaign. He had been written off. He suddenly won Iowa. He won New Hampshire. He started to win everything. And we were on a plane going to Missouri when he picked up a football and just tossed it to someone in the back. I've been very lucky to make a living doing what I love. I'm now teaching at the University of Southern California as the Warshaw Chair of Politics. Nobody does this on their own. I have been so blessed to accompany my wife, Mary Louise Oates, through life, and she has been generous enough to accompany me again and again to Italy. You know, some people think if they do well, it's simply because they're very talented. I think that for people to do well, you also need breaks. And I was lucky, I got breaks along the way.